Today we have Lewis Blakelock on the call from BM Developments and Milllock Investments. Lewis is primarily based up in the northeast, focusing on new build developments and land development. So we'll touch on a lot of that throughout this podcast. But Lewis, great to have you on, mate.
Yeah, thanks for having me, mate. Great to be here.
Yeah, it would be good to catch up as well. So me and you met back in, I think it was late 2019 or early 2020. So known each other for a couple of years. Seeing your progress when I first met. You was I think a manager in a fast food chain. Fast forward a few years. So just for the listeners, for the benefit of listeners, give us a bit of background. How did you get started in property? What made you go into property, and what was you doing prior?
Yeah, no worries. So, I started from probably where most people start, not really knowing what they wanted to do. Followed the usual route of going to college, which then followed on to university. And then eventually like a corporate role, essentially. And I only did that because I felt as if that was the normal path, which everybody chooses to do. At the time, didn't know anything about investing, didn't know anything about passive income or anything like that. I just thought you worked for 30, 40 years and you retired at 55, maybe even 65 by the time that way you get there, and take a pension, essentially. But there was always something in the back of my head where I thought, I don't want to do that, and I don't want to wait so long to get £150 a week state pension when, by the time you're 21, if you get a corporate salary, you're already on triple that a week. And it just, something wasn't sitting well with me, the way that following the normal system that I wanted, that basically the government sets out for you to do, which is where I think we initially met, because the first education program that I did, you were also part of, where we learned about mentorship. But from there, essentially, I went on to manage a KFC store, which was in the hospitality industry from university, studied an entrepreneurial degree, sort of used my skills in that, still not knowing what I wanted to do, but that opportunity was just there at the time, so took it. And then 7 months into that, met the guys in property, essentially, and started to think there's more to life than people portray, that don't really know too much about, the normal, the system, so to speak. So from there, I went on to learn about, YouTube videos, any posts I could get my hand on, podcasts, a few names which I probably won't mention in the mentoring industry because it's best kept quiet, but you've got to kiss a few frogs to learn what works and what doesn't, and invested in my own education. Learned a lot from that, which come up some opportunities to do with working in the property industry. So I shifted ships from the corporate job through to another corporate job in property management, essentially, to where I met some developers. I built a network. I started a networking event with a mentoring company, which was focused on land development. Through that company, got a buy-to-let and JV partnership through using investments. Just got that by basically talking about what I do, similar to everybody that's in the industry at the minute. Learned a lot about that buy-to-let. It took me 12 months from start to finish when we acquired it, and throughout that process I sort of thought to myself, I really like the property industry, but I don't like waiting 12 months to get a couple of £100 a month and build an asset base over 10 to 15 years to where it wouldn't get me to where I wanted to be as quick as I wanted to get there. So I very quickly realized early on that there's more to this development world, and I was always fascinated when I was in managing KFC franchise stores, when they used to buy a piece of land and build an asset and grow it and build more per year, and I just didn't know what it was at the time. And when I moved into the property industry and did this buy to let, I started to think about land development, because when you go down 5-10 minutes away from your home, there's always a new build housing estate, and I would just look at it and I'd just be fascinated by how to do it, the processes that was involved, and try to find a way, like I always have done, to learn more about it. So joined another mentorship, which was more land development focused, did that for a year. Throughout that process, found a deal in the northeast, brokered that. We were originally going to build it, but at the time it was probably biting off too much more than we could chew in terms of size of the development and experience. But lessons learned the hard way, unfortunately, to where we had to source that on to another developer. But every positive, there's always a positive and a negative, and we managed to make our money back. Just literally signed a year on a couple of weeks ago for them to exchange on it. So hopefully that fee's coming within the next few months. Also, before January, just Christmas time, got another site of industrial development. Don't know anything about industrial development too much at the moment, but just as I have always done, just jumping in, feet first, learning as I go. And that's the main focus at the minute. So I'm looking at some commercial units. Did a little bit in land development, still looking on the residential side, but finding it difficult with the restrictions and things that are coming out through the planning system with the nitrates issues across the UK. But just keep my options open in whatever comes across my desk, just appraising and looking to develop myself in more houses, hopefully within a couple more deals this year.
Fantastic. It's quite a comprehensive overview of what you've been doing, and there's a lot of things that you can do in such a short space of time. What is it? People say, you overestimate what you do in a year, but underestimate what you can achieve in 5. And, it's only been a couple of years. It seems like you've, definitely got your feet under the table with land and development. Just want to touch on a couple of things you said then. So, kissed a few frogs in the mentorship world. You've constantly invested in your own education, done training, podcasts, YouTube. That's what I used to do. There's a lot of free content out there that you can sort of gain a lot of information from, and just from speaking to people as well. There's a lot of people out there who are willing to help. Like you said, part of your network was, or part of your sort of speed of growth is due to your network, from changing from KFC to a property management company, meeting developers. You managed to joint venture with various people now in industries that like you said, you probably wouldn't have thought that you'd be doing 2 years down the line once you got into property. It's crazy the path that you end up going on, isn't it, when you get into property? Like, similar to myself, done some buy to lets, and this is another point I want to touch on. You do buy to lets. One, I'll ask you in a minute, why did it take 12 months? But two, just for example, the buy, refurbish, refinance model, it took us 11 months after completing a refurb in 2 months to get our money back. We didn't refinance before the 6 months, but once we kicked it off, it still took ages to get the money back. So although it can go quick, because one of ours at the same time only took 4 months, but there are things that can slow down the process. Like you say, I'm similar to you. I want to not get rich quick, but I want to be here in this amount of time, in a short space of time. So I'm quite impatient. But buy to lets, I think they're a fantastic foundation in property, and I love buy to lets. And I think if you continually build them over time, you're still obviously going to compound the growth and the cash flow, etc. But 250 quid a month, like you say, isn't going to make you get you where you want to be in a quick place of time. So just why did it take you 12 months? Just out of curiosity.
Coincidentally, COVID was happening, or was on the horizon, just as everybody they didn't know what was going on. They didn't know what it was. People were shutting down, prices were going up, nothing was happening. Lenders weren't lending money. Investors were pulling monies out of deals at the same time. But I think even if you remove that out of the equation, it still wouldn't have it wouldn't have knocked many months off that time scale, just because of the nature of the business. So it was about, I think it might have been March. Well, yeah, the March that COVID started locking everybody down for the first time back in 2019. But that deal only came because of COVID, because people wanted to offload. There was a portfolio landlord who was offloading X amount of properties at the time. So in a way, I do owe it to the situation, the global pandemic, for still getting that deal. So in a way, it still has benefited me. But it took a while to start with, because it was the first one that I'd done. I didn't really understand the process. Thought I'd get the keys straight away and then just go, tomorrow and start refurbing it. And naively, missed a lot of steps which I'd already educated myself on. So it touches on the point of, you can pay for education and know a lot about it, but when it comes to the situation, you easily get excited and just run wild and forget about everything that you've learned. And I was guilty of that at the time. So initially 2 or 3 months was just wasted just on the acquisition process. Well, not wasted, but it was just learning as I was going, and then once we finally got everything in place to start the refurb, finding out now we've got to pick what goes where. You can't just send somebody in and say, go refurb that house, make it look nice. It needs to have a specification. At the time, didn't have one. So going along, just saying, right, this is what we want for this is what I want for that, this is what we want for that. Mistakes happen, and then trying to answer them at the same time, and then just not being able to get a hold of materials. Finance wasn't a problem, because we'd loaned it privately, so we did have a time scale, but you could wiggle your way around that and sort of describe the situation that we were in. It was generally going to add months on the back end anyway, so investors were pretty reasonable with that. It was more just the just the materials and the time scale of refurbishing something and then renting it out. How do you find the tenants? What does legislation look like? Trying to rent it out yourself? Do you use a letting agent? Um, Going a little over on the refurb costs because you don't know how much stuff costs. Approving kitchen designs. It was just everything that comes into one development. You can massively underestimate. Sorry, and I think why I did that is one because I got excited, but the education that I did get involved in, you can educate yourself as much as you like, but until you've actually done it, you don't realize how much goes into it, and it can become overwhelming, and I suppose it did, and it just it just run its course, trying to get it through and rented, and it was just learning as we went, and it wasn't too bad of a time scale for the first one, but I would have liked it to be a lot quicker than it was.
Yeah, and like you said, valuable lesson learned. You've obviously learned from it. There's things you'd do a lot different next time. It's not easy. Like you say, you do as much training, you watch as many things online, but until you're actually stepping in to the lion's den and actually carrying out things and doing it yourself, I'm in the same, not the same boat. I've done, number of refurbishments, buy-to-lets and flips for my own, for my investors. And I'm at the minute, I'm currently choosing the kitchen, getting the kitchen design. I had the designs back mid last week. Not happy with your to and fro, and then obviously you're not going to take that one. You're going to go out to other suppliers, get the price itemised list. It could just take weeks, add weeks onto development. But I've got a Sparky that needs to obviously mark out and know where everything's going, so he can, get stuff chased in, and it just delays things. So I totally know what you're saying, but with all of that thrown in the mix, increased material prices, etc. There was a supply. Well, there were shortage of timber. It weren't really a shortage. I worked on the ports. There weren't a shortage whatsoever. There was loads of it on the port. It was the shortage of HGV drivers that couldn't actually deliver it. So obviously that caused issues as well. But I suppose we were out of the back end of it technically, but there's still issues with. I think I just saw the other day Jewsons are putting their prices up again on a lot of their materials. So when you're pricing up a refurb, you might price it up last week, all of a sudden everything goes up 10 to 15%, and then it ruins your costs if the builder lays it on, which is likely they will. So in terms of that buy to let, let's say, did it work out to be good in the end still?
It worked out perfectly fine. It was the end product that was desired, that was originally imagined at the start. Went a little over budget, but I don't think I spoke to one person in the industry that said their first development didn't. So there's a common reoccurrence here, so that made me feel a little bit better. Refinance went through fine. It was pretty easy sailing. That was first time experiencing that was painful, just trying to get all of the paperwork together, the back and forth with the lenders, the solicitors. I massively underestimated that side of the process. So that was my least favourable point, but it was the most motivating point because you knew once you did that, you were getting a refinance or a lump sum based on the valuation. Then hoping the valuation was more than all the amount which you originally anticipated. So I did hit that. So all in all, the project wasn't a bad project, and it'll last forever. Now we've doing it properly. Even though it took 11 to 12 months, it'll still be standing 30, 40 years, hopefully.
Well, that's it. Yeah, your fingers crossed, unless there's a force majeure event, but I'm sure it'll be okay. But no, I totally agree. Like once, sometimes we think, let's spend a bit extra up front because you're not going to have the hassle down the line of having to change things retrospectively. You invest a lot more up front, it probably lasts you longer and you get a better return in terms of the holding period that you have it, whether it's 5, 10, 15, 20 years. I don't intend to sell any of my properties or my jointly owned properties. No intention whatsoever. That's sort of our what's the word I'm looking for? Our strategy, buy and hold, obviously flips to pay down some equity. We're doing commercial conversions at the minute, but you went from doing that one JV buy to let, now you're doing, was it 33,000 square feet, 33,000 square foot industrial, and looking at 5.4 million GDV new build sites. Talk about the transition and, how do you go from that? How do you get from the buy to let to that point? And, there must be some sort of nerves there or some sort of fears.
Well, every day, it's always an anxious day when you learn something new, and there's a lot of times where you'd wake up and you'd think, why did I make that decision, or why have I done this, or why have I went so quickly into this? But there's that's why it's important to have the right people around you to sort of lift you up and encourage you to do it, knowing that you've got the right foundation to do it with. But to go back to how I sort of made that jump from that one buy to let, it was just a lot of, I realized that myself as a person, I have sort of like a 6 month window of when I'm doing the same thing, I get bored quite quickly. I always have to cycle on to something else or have something else recurring or be learning something in the next 6 months. So if you sat me down and said you can do buy to lets for 5 years straight, I'd probably just give up because I couldn't naturally handle just the repetitiveness of that. So, but I've been like that
being
for
an
my
entrepreneur,
whole
though, isn't
career.
it?
Sorry, say that again.
I suppose traits of an entrepreneur, isn't it? The fact that
Yeah,
you're
well,
always challenging,
funny
always doing
enough.
different things.
Yeah, funny enough, my personality type isn't someone which churns out ideas and constantly creates something. I'm not a creator. I'm a supporter and a deal maker. So it doesn't match with some traits of you see a lot of these people that are constantly want to do different projects, want to do different things, and have a creative personality on a wealth dynamics profile. I'm not that, but what I am and what I've realized is that I'm just curious, and my curiosity dies off when I've learned everything about a process. So it's not that I'm not creative in terms of wanting to do as many projects as possible. I just generally lose my curiosity, and that's one of my core values. And as soon as I've lost that, I tend to feel bored. But that boredom, it was important for me to identify where that come from. So I spent a lot of time after that buy to let 2 to 3 months just discovering why I was thinking like that and what I could do about it and what would the next option be or what excites me or what would be next. And did, as you would normally do, just research how do I learn about land development, come across, you have endless spammy Google ads and marketing about companies which can teach you everything that you need to know. Come across, did my homework and come across guys at White Box Developments who are based down in down south in Northamptonshire, I think, or Northampton.
Yeah, I think so.
Milton Keynes way. And they taught land development and commercial conversions and new build process, and everything that they taught I just resonated with straight away. So the same JV partner which I did the buy to let with, they did a Black Friday deal, October time, and you could basically pay for one course and get them discounted if you brought a business partner along. So that got me onto that. Funny enough, that's how I still got into buy to let developments. I did the same Black Friday deal because I like value for money, so I thought I'll try it.
True Northerner.
Yeah, I wouldn't spend it. I can't spend full retail price on things. I've just got this thing in my head where it has to be a discount, which is good in a way, but it also can be a negative. But that got me into the training industry where I learned about it at the same time, and then I just followed the process of what you got taught, and you got taught to do X, Y, and Z. I went out there and did it. I got a land development site secured, which was March last year, which was 8 new build development houses. It also already had planning permission granted, so the effort or majority of the effort was already sort of tick boxed. And the reason I did that is because they taught you to go and get your first site with planning permission, because you're not going to have to go through the full system and get confused pretty early on. So although it was still confusing, it eliminated some of the challenges which I would have to face. Secured that on a 6-month exclusivity agreement. So we locked the site out, took it off the market. It was just a right move, just generally sitting there. It had been on for a couple of months, hadn't sold. It was on for 1.6. And you're probably thinking, why are you looking at sites for 1.6 million when you've only just done one buy to let? But that's just also another attribute of just believing that you can do it, and this training company also taught you, forget about the price that it's on for. It's only worth what you can pay for it. So I sort of went into that with that mindset. And throughout the exclusivity period, basically what my job was then to do would be, we had 6 months to put together the QS package, the viability assessments, look at the planning permission. Was it the best planning permission that could be on that site? Was the area the best layout it could be? Was the access okay? Was there any covenants on the land? And instruct solicitors, learn the full process basically to get that up to development to construction finance and ready to appoint a contractor to then exchange on the site, delay the completion for up to the back end of when we built it, and then get everything in place, start it. Really easy, finish the site and make loads of money. But that being said, like the buy to let, it just doesn't happen like that. 5 months in, material prices went through the roof, and the profit margin of 1.3 that suddenly became about 400, 300 grand. and as a percentage of net profit, wasn't appealing to a development finance lender whatsoever. And we just couldn't, when we looked at it, just couldn't make it stack, and just had to put emotions aside and look at it logically. So then now I'm really anxious, thinking, what do I do with this site we spent 13 odd grand almost on, or give or take within reason about that, because the intention was to build it ourselves, but we'd spent all the money on legal. So if we were to source it on, we wouldn't normally do that. You'll know from running your sourcing company, you wouldn't spend loads of money on a deal if you were going to source it on. But because it was anticipated to be built by us, we thought, we'd spend the money on the process, and things just don't work out how you think they're going to work out. It's just a learning curve. Everything's always a learning curve. So we had a month to find a buyer, make the money back. So negotiate a sourcing fee, which is going to pay the initial input back, plus a little bit for the 5 to 6 months time had to spend on it, and write up or get a solicitor to draft a sourcing agreement and get it signed by all parties. So that was a month, and I thought it was impossible to do, but we just networked, talked to everybody, got introduced to a buyer who used to work for a big volume house builder through the financial advisor, which my JV partner used or still uses now to this date. And luckily, on the same day that the exclusivity agreement ran out, we brought them on site, introduced them to the vendors, shook hands, got a sourcing agreement written up. The contract was sent and signed by their party back to us the day before, but it was missing the last page, which was the signature page. So we were thinking, right, we've introduced all these parties. Now we know we're going to get chucked under the bus here because they're not going to pay a fee when they now know everybody involved. But it was a genuine error. It was just genuinely missing, and it come on the day that the exclusivity agreement ran out. So that month, I don't think I ever felt just normal. It was horrible, and anxiousness and nerves, and I couldn't describe it. I didn't know what anxiety felt like, but it was just, it was sort of, it was crippling in a way, because you thought, I've lost all this money. It's a lot of money to lose for being so early on in the journey. But luckily, by getting that signed, it then was just like a massive weight lifted straight off of my shoulders. And didn't fall out of bed with residential development from that. I sort of learned the hard way that you have to do a lot more digging at the initial stages, and be prepared to have them difficult conversation with vendors when these things happen. Just so happened that deal probably wasn't the right thing to do. Myself and my JV partner probably didn't want to do the same things to the site that we were initially discussed. So in a way, it did all work out perfectly fine. Then to answer your question on to getting onto the commercial site, that was just something then which I wasn't even looking for a commercial site. I had another JV partner which had come across their desk, and they said, "Do you want to get involved in this?" Still didn't know anything about commercial and industrial at all at the time. I just saw, I looked at the numbers, rough yields, does the site work based off what it would cost? And it wasn't particularly an expensive site without sort of disclosing what we had to pay for it. So on paper, I knew that whatever we did with it, or you could put anything on there, it would sort of work. So the risk was mitigated at the start. It was off market. If we exchanged in 2 weeks, we'd get it like basically massively below market value. So we did that, sat on it for over Christmas, and we're just about going for a pre-app now, which just took about 4 weeks to prepare. We've had to get all sorts of reports done for it, essentially. But that site has got nothing on it. It's an empty site, not a brownfield. Basically starting from scratch. So I've now went from negotiating the site with all logistics done and ready for me, to then using the learnings from that site onto this site and going from scratch and dragging it out longer to do it right and not make as many or any mistakes as what we did on the previous.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting to know that obviously trying to purchase one with planning, you've thought, whether it was naively or not, that, planning's done, I'll just go ahead and put spades in the ground. But now you're obviously doing something where you're doing the pre-app and you're doing the planning. Yeah, it might take you a lot longer, but where you're involved in every single process, you're not missing out all of that front end stuff. And, yourself and your JV partner can cover everything up front. Doing things for the first time, everything's a learning curve, unless you've got someone who's done it 100 times and they're really holding your hand. Our permitted development, we got it granted. architects are doing their bits, come to the date. And they said, we're not going to do technical drawings until you get PD granted, just in case you don't. And we were like, well, we're confident we are. We instruct you to do the drawings. We need them. We can't be sitting. We have an exchange with a delay completion. We want to do the build between that time. We don't want to have to pay for the build, then use our own money to pay for the property as well. We want to obviously refinance at the back end and get that to, or some sort of finance. We'll figure it out with lenders and pay it off at the back end. So it's not our own money. Come to PD, they're still doing the drawings, get told we need M&E consultant, obviously we need to do stuff for the water, we need fire strategy, we need acousticians, and you're like, well, why didn't you tell me this 6 weeks ago? Because 6 weeks ago I would have had it all lined up for this date. And it's just things like that, like different cogs that you're unaware of. But I suppose not being in that game and not having that network of consultants, you don't know. Building them, I'm hoping I build these relationships now. Next time it comes around on the next one, it's like, right, fingers click, ready to go, or find someone that does it all, because that's what we want. We want someone to literally do everything on this one. We just get the rent at the end. That's primarily what we want to do. But everything's a learning curve. Everything's a learning curve. Whether you're doing a buy to let, whether you're doing, even if you're just doing a kitchen on your own home, you're still going to learn stuff. But yeah, I think if you're not constantly being challenged or learning or doing new things, you probably become a bit stagnant and bored. Similar to you, I can't be doing the same things for a long period of time. I have to obviously always be learning, studying, to my own detriment really, because I've got no bloody time. But I enjoy it. I don't see property as a job. It's something that I enjoy doing, and you're probably the same, so you don't mind spending all the hours under the sun on it.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's like it comes down to when you do everything once, it's always harder the first time. And then when you do it again, it's a little bit easier. And then when you were just mentioning about building up that network, when they hadn't told you that they needed all them consultants, then next time you already know them consultants. So it's just a case of pinging an email or having a quick call to sort of say, look, here's the site. This is what I need. Go away and do X, Y, and Z work on it essentially. Then planning permission, just to go back to the planning permission point, is it's very difficult buying sites with planning already granted. And a lot of people sort of think, well, it's going to be a good site because it's got that planning permission on there and it is developable. Now, sometimes the only value to a lot of these sites that are on the market that have planning permission granted is just the fact that the authority has said it is developable.
Yeah.
Now, just because they've said you can get 5 or 6 houses on there, it could be in an area where you can't build for £1 per square foot for much margin for what it would sell for per square foot. So a lot of people, unfortunately, go into getting planning permission for sites not thinking like a developer, because architects don't instruct them or tell them, like they haven't told us essentially throughout the process that if you do this, you'll get this. If you do that, you'll get that. They come to an architect or a planning consultant and say, I want this on my site. What do you think? And then they're going to get a fee out of it and they say, yeah, fair dues, we can probably get that, or this is reasonable. And a lot of them don't stack. And when you're buying sites, which, to come back to that Northumberland site, that was a family-owned site, and it probably all in all had about 80 to 100 grand invested in it just throughout the planning process, the acquisition. It was handed down, just general little bits of costs here and there. But going on back to the price that it was on for 1.6 because it was in a cracking area and the margins were there. So some vendors get it right to where they can make a load of money, but some vendors they're stuck in the ways to where they get planning permission on a site which just plainly doesn't work. And it's sad to see, because some of these sites on paper, these schemes look brilliant and you'd love to build them, but the margins just aren't there and they would just never even work no matter what you put on that site, whether you went back in for planning or not. Yeah. And that's something I learned massively throughout that process to do with them. Just because it's had something granted doesn't mean you should go for it, or doesn't mean that it would work.
Yeah, and I actually, you just triggered a point. I remember I come to you ages ago with a potential opportunity. So again, it was on Rightmove. I can't remember whether it's six to 8 houses. It's like some semis and some detached, and they were bifolds at the back, high specification, EV infrastructure on all of the properties, and I can't remember the size of the site. It wasn't massive, so it would have been quite cramped, but we actually paid for a future risk valuation by RICS surveyor. We was like, we want to know potential potential GDV of the site, individual retail unit sale prices, and achievable rent. So they went and done the full survey. It's a desktop survey looking at the plans, looking at comparables, and it weren't in the best area. It was right near some tower blocks. It weren't bad location, but it weren't the best. And you're fully aware, being up north, property prices tend to be significantly lower than other areas in the UK. So this site, I think it was on for 400k, and I think I worked out it was like 2,200 square foot of actual like development on terms of property, just on property.
That's not a lot for what would be put on there, really, is it? It's quite small.
Yeah, it's not massive. It's only like 6 or something houses, 3 beds, 4 beds. It's just the way they're positioned. Was it 2,200 square meters maybe, or I can't remember. It's escaped me the numbers. It was so long ago, and I worked out that and I know you should do like the finger in the air or the per square foot basis, but I worked out, I think, on the per square foot, just on £200 per square foot roughly, and this was before all the material prices went up and stuff. I think it worked out to be like over 1.5 million in terms of build costs, or even like 1.2 million. So close. The GDV of the site on the Rick survey was 1.5. He wanted 1.4. He wanted 400. It was going to be about 1.2 to build, plus contingencies, plus time. All the costs, additional costs and contingency. And there's no profit built into that. So you'd have to get the site for free in order to make any money on it. And
sometimes then it still doesn't even work. You're in the minus straight away. Like the quickest thing to do is I used to spend probably like you've done in the past endless amounts of time just going into the planning portals, looking at the drawings, looking at the sites, spend about 20 minutes, half an hour just looking at it. And now I just don't even bother doing that, because if it doesn't work, there's no point in even getting excited about the drawings. So just if anyone was to take anything away from the podcast, all I do is look at the GDV. So Rightmove, put the postcode in for the application of the planning or the development deal that's been on the market. If it's not on the market, it'll have some drawings or something to it. It'll have a location. So have a look at the GDV. A lot of these sites don't actually have comparables because people are getting a bit more creative in terms of what they're putting on these empty sites. So if it doesn't have a like-for-like comparables, say if it's in the country, or if it's a bungalow development in an area where there's no bungalows, what do you compare it to? So I've now, and I'll always swear by, I'll go by the average price per square foot of what a property sold for in that area, because what you've just said there, and the ICS valuer, that's what they'll look at, that data. So if you're looking at that straight away, say if it was a 10,000 square foot development and they sold it, the average sales price per square foot was £220. I would just simply multiply the 10,000 by £220 to give me a GDV, and then have a look at the 10,000 square foot times the build cost, and that would just instantly give me a 2-minute overview of whether the site would work or not. And if it looks like it's too tight, I'll not even bother looking at it, because then I've got to add what you were mentioning before, the contingencies, the legal costs, the finance costs, everything into the deal, which will then just lower the margin. But if it comes back and it looks like you're going to make about 30, 40%, you know that once you took all that off, you're going to have a 20% margin. And it's just quick, it makes your life so much more easier, and you can appraise more or less everything. Commercial buildings are a prime example. There's not a lot of commercial comparables to where you can look at another conversion. So a lot of people take offices and they'll change them to co-living development, HMOs, or big student apartments, or even flats. But if there's not a development nearby, where do you look? So it's the easiest way to sort of mitigate the risk and quickly appraise the site.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. That's what I've been doing. We funny enough, like you say about planning portals and looking at drawings, getting the total GDV, the square footage. I was looking at one down south. It was an auction. It hadn't sold, and I actually looked at the planning was granted, but it was for a specific drawing. But there was quite a few, and the drawing I was looking at was 5 apartments. So I thought, it's quite close. Having checked it again 2 weeks later, it was actually for the drawing. The application that was approved was for 4 apartments.
All right.
So the apartments, it turns out that it wouldn't have worked. There was no margin in it, because obviously that extra apartment down south worked into, pretty much the profit, or that's where your profit was.
Yeah.
And I suppose doing your due diligence and being thorough, isn't it, really?
Oh yeah, it's people will put things on the market to try and get rid of it because they've soon realised they've had oh shit moment. They thought, right, that this deal doesn't stack. I've spent all this money on it. I own it. I need to get rid of it. And a lot of agents shouldn't do it, but what they do is they advertise a lot of sites with planning as well, which don't have it. They'll have had an outline application or a pre-app or a positive pre-app response. Whereas a lot of that doesn't necessarily mean it's actually got the planning, and they're not selling it with planning gear, but to a novice, which is looking at that, they'll think, oh, brilliant, I can get a site for pretty cheap and it's got full planning approval. And it's like pulling the wool over people's eyes, essentially. And it's not right. And it's stuff like that happens all the time. So you've always got to look into the detail of what's on these sites. It's like treat every development as an auction pack. You wouldn't go and buy something from auction unless, well, I know a lot of people who have done, but they'll never do it again without looking through the legal pack and getting a solicitor to look at it. You shouldn't do that either with the type of sites that you're talking about, all these big development sites. Always take it with a pinch of salt what's actually advertised and what the development has got approved.
Yeah, and you can go on the planning portals anyway. All the councils, local authorities have the planning portal, so you'll be able to see the feedback, the comments, environmental agency, highways agency.
Yeah.
If it's in a conservation area, their comments. So due diligence is important up front, and I suppose that's one of the key takeaways. Always if you do more work up front, it's obviously going to pay dividends in the back end, isn't it? The more you do up front, obviously there's probably a lot more time, but like you say. I don't know a per square foot rate of how to work out a development. Everything's changed in the last couple of years. Is it 200, 250, 300 pounds per square foot? I don't know. It's area dependent as well, but
it depends. A lot of people ask that, like every time you go or you go to a networking event that's not where you're based or where you live, they'll say, what can you build for up in your area? And some people, they'll just name a number, and realistically, you could say a house costs 135 to 140 pound a square foot to build in the northeast, but you've then got to ask, what is that? Is that just the internals and externals? Does it include the finance cost? Is it the overall site? When you add all that on, it might be 180 pound a square foot. So a lot of people will sell you on, you can build for 140 pound per square foot a residential unit or a commercial unit in that area. So the deal will stack, but then you then got to go back to them and say, well, where's that pound per square foot? What does it involve? What preliminary processes are within that? There's just so much to it.
Yeah, specification of finishings as well. If you put an 18 karat gold taps in, a brand new build, it's going to cost a lot more than if you're just doing bog standard off the shelf. You're doing 100 build development, you're getting trade pricing. They're obviously going to do your discount, so it is totally case dependent, isn't it? There are all the fun, I guess, but.
Yeah, and a QS is the best person if you can get a viability assessment, a QS is the best person to appraise a deal for you. However, I've also learned the lesson of you always got to check through their work. And a good saying that I've always sort of ran with a QS of how I would describe them is that viability report, the QS will just tell you what it's going to be on the day of the races. So a week later, it's a different race day. The QS report is going to be totally different because the external market factors. Someone might have made an announcement that, say Rishi Sunak, he's going to bring X, Y, and Z into the UK. He's going to bring this package. It totally affect everything in the economy affects what the build costs or what price per square foot you're going to build for. So always take it with a pinch of salt. And if you want to be extra cautious, add 10% to the QS's viability assessment on top of your 10% contingency. And I know 10% is a round number, but a lot of them will work off 4 or 3% on the overall development because you're realistically not going to be going over that amount of percentage on your development. Otherwise, you're going to get into massive negatives. But development finance lenders, it depends on what they want. So you might be looking at something with a 5% contingency, but realistically, when it comes to the finance stage, that lender then wants 15% just because it's safer for them. And that might be 300 grand, that comes off of your profit margin, then all of a sudden it doesn't stack. But there's nothing you can do about it because the lenders
that's what they're going to lend on, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what they want. And unless you're going to get personally invested, you're going to have to go to a development finance company and add the 15% contingency on. So that's another one to be to look out for because I've been stung by that in the past.
Definitely lots of tips in terms of the new build and planning and developing. It's something that I want to get into. Probably not yet. Stick with the commercial conversions for now. Do them for a year or so, and then go into the new builds land. I want to do eco homes. I want to do 100% sustainable eco homes, but that's going to be a whole different ballpark. That's not going to be standard build costs either, is it? It's whether it's passive house technology or all sorts, but you've got to learn by doing it, I guess.
Yeah, well, they've got like them as well. Eco homes, they have the pros and cons. It's similar to modular homes to where um, they might take 4 months to build because you're just dropping it and putting it on the site, or you're using different materials, or using different methods of energy or sustainable energy, and it might cost 1.5 times if your normal build, but then you might be saving that X amount of time to what of the time skill on the site in finance costs, or your other miscellaneous costs, to where because you can justify spending that upfront because it's then going to also then have the sustainability in the long term, where it's going to cost you less money if you keep it, and it's going to cost the customer less money if you're going to sell it to them, and then they're going to have that as their own home, and then it's an extra sales value, so the sales perception
Exactly,
of
yeah.
they're getting more value for their money, and then you're also then there's all kinds of grants, green homes grants. You got to look at like the government vision. Where do they want to be by 2030? Where are they going sustainably? What energy are they bringing in? Electric cars are going crazy at the minute, so looking at that type of stuff, what you mentioned there is the future sustainable energy. I think we're going to see a massive shift in the residential market on how they build their homes. The likes of Belway, Taylor Wimpey, all them types of volume house builders, I can never see them building eco homes or energy sufficient homes. So there's a
Build on
gap in the
price, don't
market
they?
for the future. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a
they
gap. There's a
build on
gap for
price.
somebody to come undercut them and make or develop these sustainable homes, or create a market, or emphasize the market even further and contribute towards it to get up to the stage of what these big volume house builders are, but on the sustainable side.
Watch this space, it'll be me. But no, like I know it's where the world's going. Do I feel so passionate about Lee? Yes, in a way. I'm not a tree hugger, I'm not one of these, but I do feel passionate about it. And the reason being is, putting this sort of technology in your homes. We put technology in some of the developments, even our commercial conversion. There's no gas, purely electric, solar on the top that feeds the infrared heating system that we have behind the ceilings. Not only does that, reduce bills, the fact is like maximizes floor space because you've got no radiators or anything's on the wall. There's loads of benefits about it. We're putting technology in, even the EV infrastructure. Just reading up on it, landlords can get up to 200 grants for up to 200 properties on EV infrastructure per year. And it's £350. It's 75% of the installation costs for the EV infrastructure for cars, with a limit of 350 quid. Now I thought it's going to cost you about 7-8 grand to put in. They ain't. One I found here in Hull, it starts at 499 quid. So you're only paying a few hundred quid to put in EV infrastructure, but you're future-proofing your development. You're not going to have to retrospectively do it when by 2030, 100% of all new cars need to be EV. Average tenure of a vehicle on the road is around 8 years. So everything from 22 onwards, once you're getting into 2030, they're all going to be obsolete, essentially, these diesel and petrol. So there's a lot of things to look out for, and it's something that we're putting in now because it's going to benefit in the future, and you don't have to go back and change things, which costs you obviously more money. What is it? So looking forward to, you've obviously talked about the two developments. Do you have anything on your on the horizon now?
So what I've sort of also learned is not to put all your eggs in one basket, but to focus on getting something off the ground before you look for something else, and not overloading your plate. If another deal comes up and it fits in with the structure of what I've got at the moment whilst getting this industrial site through, I will look to take that on. There's just a lot of unforeseen in the residential market at the moment, to where there's a lot of issues with the planning system in terms of nitrates and water pollution, and local authorities not approving any planning applications. So I'm sort of riding the wave with that at the moment. If anybody looks into that, if you just search nutrient neutrality, it's a massive planning issue, which has just happened over the past couple of months. And 18 months ago, Portsmouth had their planning system closed down for 18 months, not approving any residential applications, essentially. So I'm sort of riding the wave for that at the moment, to see what happens with that. That will provide opportunities in the residential market for deals coming up, of course, naturally. And there's also different deals which will come through the ranks which wouldn't normally because of it. So it's sitting tight, waiting for something to pop up. The industrial site is going to take a lot of planning just to get it right, with it being a new concept to me, especially, and getting that right. So the way that I'm looking at it is, if I spend a lot of time on that to get it right, that income that would generate at the back end, depending on how much square footage of industrial space that we put on there, would be between 100 to 200,000 pounds gross a year. Take away all your costs off that would then set me up to then have recurring developments year on year. So if I focus, my main focus is that just to simply provide the cash flow to invest more into more industrial sites or more residential sites. The capacity wise, if something does come up, I could take it on if I felt as if I had the mental capacity to do so. If I didn't, I feel as if I've got a good enough team around me to help facilitate that. But it's like speaking to people like yourselves, doing networking events, hosting them, attending them, where that'll really come into play to where if I do want to take a lot on, I have the infrastructure to do so. So I'm just sort of giving myself a majority of choice at the moment and a bit more flexibility so that I've got the headspace to get the foundations right.
Yeah, definitely. It's important as well, isn't it? Like you say, there's people around you, whether you take it on, you know, you can even source it on and still, there's always ways of generating revenue from what you do, isn't there? You know,
Yeah.
similar property sources, find a buy to let, you don't want it, you sell it on, you want the best one, you keep it. Similar to what you're doing on a different scale, I guess. You're fortunate you sold that one on to that developer. They might know someone in the future, and it's just building your network. So yeah, to be fair, one thing I'm going to go away and research the nutrient neutrality. Obviously, this planning issue. Like you say, there's always opportunities when things like this happen. Obviously, you know, when they change the rules around permitted development, you've got to do the prior approval.
Yeah.
Things technically become easier in a sense, but not many people knew about it. Obviously, I don't know too much about this to say this is going to be the back end, this is going to be the best thing, but I'm sure there's going to. So just coming to an end, then obviously looking forward, doing developments. That's your main goal, isn't it? Developments and high cash flowing, high yielding properties, like whether it's commercial, industrial. Well, it's all the same semantics, isn't it? But
yeah, a bit of everything really, and probably just to add something a little bit different is property. The way that I was sort of learned and looked at property is, it is a business, and it's like anything. A lot of people who are massively successful, whether that's property or the wider industry or the wider market, is they're building the business to scale and grow to where what the most people want to do, they want to make wealth out of it. So if that's in the property, they're building asset bases to then get the equity, increase the capital gains and things like that, and have sustainable cash flow to fulfill their lifestyle. Some people build it up and sell it. So I'm quite interested as well in the business market or the business side of things. I quite like to give back to people, and I'm quite leadership driven as well. So I feel as if there will be some kind of business as well as the property industry for me in the future to where I will be part of, or I create or work with. Don't quite know what that is yet, but I know that's my passion. I like to create and build things, and looking back on my past, just from having those experiences, I wouldn't have known that unless I did that in property. Property will always be there. I'll always be doing developments at this current moment in time, but in 5 to 10 years, you know, you never know. You might not be saying that. So I do love business, and I do feel as if there will be a business at some point. I just can't put my finger on it at the minute.
there's no rushes there. Got many years ahead of you. So how old are you again?
25.
25. Yeah. So you know, when I didn't even start in property till after that. Some people start 40s, 50s, 60s. Some people start, you know, 17, 18. I'm fairly jealous of the people that start at 17, 18 because they have many years ahead. But, you know, everything falls into place at the right time, doesn't it? Just where can people find you, Lewis? You mentioned networking and hosting. Talk about that. You know, feel free to plug it if you want, as well as where can they find you on socials?
Yeah, there's a lot of I've done quite a lot of networking events, hosted them. There's a few logistics happening with those events lately to where I can't really pinpoint and mention dates because there's nothing organised. We're changing the infrastructure of it, but I've done that for about a year in terms of just hosting events to do with developments. But I'm all over the northeast usually to network, and when I can do, I'm more active on LinkedIn than the other platforms. But if you do search my name on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and put the word property after it, it will come up. So, LinkedIn I'm most engaging with, just for the fact of I just prefer it. You know, Facebook I feel as if it's more crowded to do with just a lot of people posting stuff for the sake of posting it, whereas LinkedIn's the actual business content. Probably why I know that's a business in my future, but I just don't know what it is yet because I do like the LinkedIn infrastructure. But Instagram I'm pretty creative with. I don't post a lot because I don't feel as if there's a sort of a catch-22 to it. You need to be seen. You need to tell everybody what you do, but there's different ways of doing it. So I'm more sort of focused now on the past 6 months of showing showing results and letting them speak for me, as opposed to feel as though I have to post every single day. So I've scaled down on the content and then let people and started engaging directly with people because I get more out of that, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, LinkedIn's definitely the place.
But yeah, I'm the same. I find LinkedIn tend to get more reach, more engagement, different clientele, different type of demographics that you have on there. Like you say, Facebook is still good, but I feel, you know, it's the same sort of pool of people in terms of not the individuals themselves, the sector. And like you say, across Instagram and sort of things, people post for the sake of it. Don't get me wrong, I'll still do a post every now and then to keep that engagement there and keep pushing things out there. But sometimes I just read some posts and just think, oh, you fucking do me. I've seen this across 8 different groups this week. Same thing, you know, all recycled. And a fair play, they're doing it. Yeah, they've obviously got good content manager doing the right things. But for me, I just not into that.
But it comes down to like they put a lot of activity in, and that creates opportunity for them, and it's
exactly,
good. But it comes down to like I was just mentioning at the start of the podcast. I realized that my values weren't aligning with posting a lot of content because it was out of sync with what my personality is like. And I know I'm not that type of person. I know that you have to be in certain circumstances, so I will adapt when I need to. But naturally feeling having to post on all these different platforms all the time, it just wasn't me. But I realized that quite early on, and start to do it in a way which is more beneficial, like you were saying, posting more engagement content, not because I have to, but because I want to.
exactly.
Less often, but to give more value and have more engaging conversations and build a better network from them posts.
Fantastic. Well, listen, Lewis, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. Good to catch up. We'll try not to leave it as long next time, but you know, once you sort of get a development off, well, once you know it's alive and kicking, be good to have you back on and talk you through. You know, we're at the sort of early stages. Once you've got spade in the ground, maybe, and just do a bit of a follow on. Maybe even at the end when you're saying, yeah, it's fucking worth this much money. I'm rolling in this each month. But you know, what I like to. What I'd like to be able to give the listeners is, you know, this is the before, maybe a bit of a during, a bit of an after, so people can follow that story, you know, and get value. Because there's many tips that will come out of it. You'll learn a lot, I'll learn a lot, and so will a lot of people. So, listen, mate, pleasure having you on, and you know, good luck with your developments and good luck with what you've got in the pipeline.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much for having me.